John Burton Davis Jr. was born in 1924 in Atlanta, Georgia, and following high school he joined the US Navy and fought in World War II. After the war ended, he attended the University of Georgia on the GI Bill, while creating cartoons and collaborating with friends on a one-off humorous magazine titled Bullsheet. After graduation, he took a job at the Atlanta Journal, where he briefly worked uncredited as an inker for Ed Dodd's Mark Trawl comic strip. In 1949, Davis received a commission to illustrate a Coca-Cola training manual, which earned him enough money to buy a car and drive to New York, where he enrolled at the Art Students League. In the same year, he found work inking the Saint comic strip for Mike Roy, and at this time his own American Civil War-themed strip Beauregard was also published, but it quickly sank without trace. Davis was seriously considering giving up and going back to Georgia to find some other form of employment. But as luck would have it, in 1950, he started to create work for William Gaines's EC Comics. The company published several popular titles of the kind that was seriously disapproved of by parents and moralizing pillars of the community. Naturally enough, American teenagers and particularly young males were obsessed with them, and the condemnation by authority figures only deepened their interest. Davis's work for these comics and Tales from the Crypt in particular quickly earned him a well-deserved reputation for the quality and expressiveness of his ink technique. All his work for EC was created initially as pencil drawings, over which he applied black ink with immensely skillful and controlled use of brush and pen. As with all comics at the time, the colour was added at print, sometimes with less than immaculate registration, and whether Davis had any say in its application, I've been unable to find out. But equally crucial to his popular success in this market was the obvious enthusiasm with which he approached the gorier elements of the stories. Among the many horror tales he illustrated, which are now considered classics of their kind, was Foul Play, which was specifically denounced in no uncertain terms by Dr. Frederick Wortham in his diatribe against comics titled Seduction of the Innocent. Davis illustrated the covers for every issue of Tales from the Crypt between issue number 29 and number 46. And in addition to his prodigious output for this title, he also produced a large volume of work for Harvey Kurtzman, who at the time was the editor for EC. Davis's work for these combat-themed comics was every bit as thrilling and plausibly rendered as his horror-themed work, and the depth and intensity of his hatching made the perfect platform to produce dramatically lit colour effects of considerable sophistication. When Kurtzman launched Mad as a comic book for EC in 1952, Davis was a natural choice, and he appeared in almost every one of the first 30 issues. In this first incarnation of Mad, Davis was able to fully indulge his predilection for manic comedy, with contributions such as 1953's riotously illustrated detective spoof Kane Keene Private Eye, written by Kurtzman. He even got the opportunity to have fun at the expense of his former employer Ed Dodd and the Mark Trawl strip. And it was the sense of gung-ho irreverence that pervaded Mad, and particularly Davis's work at this time, which made it such an enduring visual milestone in the lives of many. This wildly energetic element of his output was a perfect match for Kurtzman's humour, and the parodies they created were immensely popular. His work for Mad wasn't instead of work for the other EC titles, but in addition to it, making his astonishing daily workload even harder to comprehend. In 1954, another comedy title in the form of Panic was launched, but failed to achieve anything even approaching the same popularity as Mad. But while it lasted, Davis was among those who also contributed to its pages. But following congressional hearings about the supposedly negative effects of the violent and horror-themed comics were having on the nation's youth, Tales from the Crypt and others were shut down. Mad continued to enjoy great popularity, but in 1956 it was decided to reimagine the comic as a magazine, at which point Kurtzman left, taking Jack Davis among others with him to launch his own series of alternatives such as Sick and Cracked. Davis contributed to all of them, but Mad continued to dominate the market and was now employing other cartoonists of considerable prowess. In the later 1950s, Davies's work began to appear with increasing frequency outside the comic book genre, and he produced several different series for Topps bubblegum cards from 1959 into the mid-1960s, which were eagerly collected by American children. His first foray into record cover work also appeared in that year, and in 1960 Davies created his first movie poster with this comically nightmarish duotone for a British horror film. At this time, not only was he astonishingly prolific, but he became ever more diverse, with more comic book work for Cracked and a series of more serious Western comics, now devoid of graphic violence and duly approved by the Comics Code. He illustrated more album covers for comedy acts and established a meaningful presence in magazines. There were numerous commissions for the magazine Cavalier, many of them double-page spreads. And although most were humorous, he also created others which were considerably more dramatic in their intent. He also became a regular presence in the pages of Hugh Hefner's Playboy magazine, and over a period of 3 or 4 years produced a string of impressively rendered, full-page colour gag cartoons. And like his record albums, these featured a blend of ink line and tonal watercolour washes which produced great solidity and visual appeal. He even occasionally lent a hand to Playboy's satirical strip Little Annie Fanny, created by his friends Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. In 1961 he also attempted to get his own humour magazine Yak Yak off the ground, but it ran for only 2 issues, and that was the last time he attempted such a project. A year later he created page illustrations for a book of humorous stories written by William Price Fox, titled Southern Fried. His work for this book was a virtual masterclass in the use of his trademark hatching techniques, which demonstrated an enviable ability to create tonal values using line only. In 1963 he produced another movie poster with this now iconic colour image of the huge cast featured in the riotous caper film It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. He continued to work with Harvey Kurtzman throughout this period, and was a stalwart presence in the pages and quite frequently on the covers of Sick magazine, arguably the most successful of those competing with Mad. Simultaneously, he was also creating increasing numbers of humorous illustrated album covers for a variety of popular acts of the time. And in 1965 he illustrated the children's book Meet the North American Indians by Elizabeth Payne, with a series of more seriously intended pen and ink monochromes, and the somewhat redundant overprint of what appears to be brown crayon. 1965 was also the year he returned to Mad, by which time the magazine was being published in black and white only, apart from the cover and back pages. And it was not long after his return that he created this wraparound cover for a paperback compilation which cheekily parodied his own earlier movie poster. The monochrome images Davies created for Mad from this point on continued to use varying amounts of fine hatching from non-existent to abundant, but unlike most of his earlier comic book artwork, he was also regularly fleshing out his drawings with tonal washes of watercolour as a less time-consuming technique to create shading. His work appeared regularly in Mad throughout the later 1960s, and he appears to have had particular fun satirising the hippie movement of the later 1960s and early 70s, among other subjects. Despite his re-established relationship with Mad, he continued to be busy in other areas, and in the early 1970s Davies had a regular comic strip feature, Superfan, in Pro Quarterback, written by his Mad colleague Nick Meglin. He also contributed to several Rankin Bass productions, and among others his character designs were used as the basis for the animated series of the Jackson 5. And his character designs for various endearingly repulsive comic bug and insects formed the basis of a TV ad campaign for Raid Insecticide. And in addition to this work outside the comics arena, film posters continue to be a significant element of Davies's output. And the same was true for TV, with many covers for the TV Guide magazine. Significantly, in 1972 he started to appear regularly on covers for Time magazine, a highly prestigious and I would speculate financially generous commission. and he employed his undoubted skills as a humorist to make eloquent commentary on various matters, from the relatively trivial to the more significantly political. But all of it was eloquent in its purpose and visually engrossing, with signal figure work and more crowded compositions. Throughout the decade, Davies continued to be a ubiquitous presence, with advertising work for any number of clients alongside his many other commitments. By now he was arguably a household name throughout the USA and was generally viewed with the same benign fondness earlier reserved for Norman Rockwell, and was a similar ambassador, however comedic, for the American way of life. Now one of Mad's longest running contributors, he was used extensively at this time to illustrate quite a few of the film and TV parodies more commonly associated with his Mad colleague Mort Drucker. In 1990 he created a series of comic representations of NFL players titled Hot Shots, which were popular with fans of the sport. And following this he began to disengage from professional work, but didn't stop altogether. In 1995 he produced his last image for a cover of Mad, and he and his wife relocated from New York to St. Simon's Island, Georgia. But even then his retirement wasn't total, and in 2012 he illustrated the children's book Bobby and the Magic Pen, written by Joseph Pfeiffer, even though now in his 80s. And a year later the tale of Don Quixote, rewritten by Tom Lathrop, was also published, and featured a series of comic narrative images which clearly showed that he had lost none of the qualities which had made him so popular for so long. And following a long and prolific career, Jack Davies died following a stroke in 2016 at the age of 92. From the first time I saw Jack Davies's work, which was his Kane Keene strip reprinted in the paperback Son of Mad collection, I tried my level best and of course ultimately failed to emulate his technique. But I continue to admire his drawn style and relentless imagination for the rest of my life. Making this tribute has been one of the greatest pleasures of my time with the channel, and it's reminded me just how much Jack Davies has meant to me for the inspiration and encouragement he provided, without even knowing it.